Hello, welcome to Kratom Sobriety. This is Charlie, and we're at episode 101. And today's episode is dedicated to relapse. Jacob has an interview with Alison, and Alison was going to be on our podcast about a year ago, but she had a relapse, and she's bounced back, and now she's here to tell her story. Relapse happens. For many people, this is a tough week. I want to dedicate this show to a longtime listener who recently relapsed are on the West Coast. They texted me this morning after we've been talking about the relapse for the last couple of weeks. They said, I had bad kratom dreams all night. In my dream, I was so tired. I kept going to all these different pharmacies and manipulating the pharmacist into giving me kratom. Parentheses, I guess in my dream world, there was more regulations, and it can be rough when you achieve a period of being clean and you find yourself return to it. So I have a little clip from a YouTube that I thought was really well done. It's about 2 minutes. I was going to give my own speech about fighting relapse, and I think this does a good job. I do have one quote that I like that I want to share with you, and it goes as this. I am not defined by my relapses, but my decision to remain in recovery despite them. And we have an unofficial motto around here on the podcast. Don't quit quitting. I'll be back right after this recording plays.
Relapse is a possibility at any stage in recovery. No matter how long you've been sober, it's important to have a plan for how to avoid relapse and what to do if it happens. Creating a relapse prevention plan helps you identify and reduce the risk of relapse. A prevention plan supports long-term sobriety and minimizes repeated setbacks. A relapse prevention plan communicates a course of action to deal with triggers and cravings. A prevention plan is typically written but can also be a conversation between you and your support system. Relapse is typically a 3-part process, which means you can identify certain behaviors and emotions that may lead to it. These include emotional, mental, and physical relapses. There are many different models you can base your relapse prevention plan on. However, each plan has 3 basic steps. The first step is to look at your history of substance use. Determining what caused the original use or prior relapse is key to avoiding them in the future. Ask yourself questions like, what trains of thought make me more likely to use? And what environments do I feel more compelled to use in? The second step is to brainstorm a list of scenarios that could lead to relapse and their warning signs. Some people begin to think and behave differently before a possible relapse. Creating a list of warning signs gives you an idea of when this may occur. The third step is to establish an action plan. Find other ways to release your frustrations and plan what you can do before turning to drugs and alcohol. It's important to identify who you can turn to for help, what you will ask them, and what other support you may need. The more specific your plan is, the better. When creating your relapse prevention plan, there are also some important details you should include. Include a list of triggers that may lead to relapse and ways you can manage your cravings. Preventative tools and other practices that have helped you through recovery so far should also be listed. It is also important to think about positive lifestyle changes that led you to recovery. Include things in your life that addiction may have damaged that you hope to amend. Remember, each person's needs are different. It's important to be honest with yourself and know where you are in your recovery. Revisiting your prevention plan can help motivate you in the future.
So a couple thoughts on kratom relapse specifically. Number one, I have to say by far the most common situation that I hear people say they relapse on kratom is when they accidentally find a pill, a capsule, bottle of kratom in a piece of luggage, in a drawer, under their car seat. There's just something about, maybe it's because we hoard them, we stash them all around our house, maybe hiding them. But by far, and I wish I had some statistics and I wish I had some documentation to prove this, but prepare yourself for finding some kratom in your house or your vehicle or in the jacket that you wore last winter, and come up with a plan of action of how you will deal with that when you find it. so that you can stay on the right track and prevent use. Because for some people, it only takes one and then they're back to the races. And last, I'm going to close, and this is controversial. In 12 steps, there's a total abstinence push. And there's the school of thought is one drop of alcohol, it's a disaster. You got to start over. I think this is true for many people, but I find in kratom, maybe because some of the harms are less, maybe because some people, the kratom is a secondary addiction and they're staying away from their drug of choice, but they keep relapsing on kratom. I do think there is a difference between a slip and a full relapse, or maybe what they say, a lapse and a relapse. I do encourage some people to embrace a kratom change date instead of resetting their counter. If they do slip and they have one day where they use kratom, let's say you have 3 months off and you use kratom, instead of beating yourself up and giving yourself permission to go on a binge, stop that at one day, and you didn't lose your 3 months. You're maybe the first of the year, your change date is still January 1st. Just keep marching on. I think day counting is really appropriate for some people, but you made a decision to have a different type of relationship with kratom. And just because you used one time doesn't mean you have to throw away the success that you had. I've seen this work with a couple people when they switch their mentality, and instead of saying, I got to do day one over again, and then beating themselves up and then binging and then starting the whole process up again, they let a slip just stay at one day, and then they marched on and they had success after that. And I encourage you to do that. Here's the rest of the episode, the interview. Afterwards, you'll hear from Jacob and Jasmine with kratom in the headlines and resource of the week. Thank you.
Welcome to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is Jacob, and today on the podcast we have a wonderful guest, and her name is Alison. Alison, how would you like to introduce yourself to the audience? Things like where you're from, hobbies, family, and anything you want to tell the world.
I'm Allison. I'm 38 years old, female. I work at a clinic in adolescent mental health and doing counseling and case management. I'm from West Virginia. I'm on the border, so I do work in Pennsylvania. I come from kind of a medium-sized family, mom, dad. I have a brother and a sister who were close in age, and they're two of my best friends. I also, for hobbies, I exercise. I like to take long-distance walks. I make wreaths, like door wreaths. I like to read. Right now, I'm actually trying to discover new hobbies, things that I love to do. Now that I'm not using, I have a lot more idle time. So I'm trying to discover and rediscover old and new hobbies.
Oh, that's great. I grew up in southwestern Pennsylvania, so probably not too far from where you live.
What county?
Beaver.
Okay, I work in Washington and Greene County.
Yeah, I know where that is. Yeah, I live in New England now. I haven't lived there in almost 20 years. Still have family in the area, so
Awesome.
that's interesting. And wreaths, huh? That's cool. That's an interesting hobby. I don't think we've had anybody that does that kind of craft making yet. But
yeah, it is fun. It's something to do with your hands, and you get to be creative and create things. So I like it.
That's awesome. All right. Now that we've learned a little bit about you, why don't you tell us a little bit about, why you're here? How did you come to discover kratom, and how did you first get kind of introduced with the plant and start using it?
So I have had a problem with alcohol. So, I do have that addictive personality. But at the time I wasn't drinking, and I was at a smoke shop just buying cigarettes. And I was talking to the clerk, and she introduced me to kratom as a natural, I think plant-based is what she said. And it's an alternative to alcohol. So that kind of caught my attention. So I did try it. It was just the powder form. So I wasn't immediately addicted. A couple of days later, I discovered the extract shots in another smoke shop. They were kratom extract shots, and I knew I had tried the kratom, so I wondered what the difference was. So I tried one of those. It was the MIT 45 shots, and it was like immediately I was addicted to it. I've been prescribed painkillers in the past, and the way I felt when I took that first extract shot is the way like a painkiller would make me feel. So I was addicted pretty much immediately. that's kind of where it started.
Okay. Yeah, I also have a drinking problem. I haven't drank in a long time, almost 6 years. Similarly, found kratom as a alternative to alcohol, quote unquote, safe and healthier alternative.
Right.
And yeah, I started with the powder too, and then I tried a different extract. I had a similar experience where I was like, oh yeah, this is like taking oxy again, but
hmm
I can buy it at the store. Wow.
Right.
And it's not addictive. Great.
Right.
Yeah. So you said you kind of almost immediately knew you were liking the extracts. How did your usage progress? Did you start taking one every couple of days, or was it like every day as soon as you found the extracts? How did it progress into like a full blown problem?
Yeah, the MIT 45 shots progressed from like one or two a day to about six or seven a day. At $20 a piece, it was costing me a significant amount of money.
Yeah.
I was able to quit those for a few weeks, actually pretty easily once I decided I was done. And then I discovered the shots, and for some reason, those are a different demon. I did have trouble getting off those. Well, I'll back up. So I saw the shots, saw that they were $10 a piece. I was like, well, that's a lot cheaper than the $20 ones. But, before I knew it, I was using 9 to 10 of those a day. I was so addicted, I felt like I didn't have a choice. I would tell myself at night, you're done tomorrow. It's going to be day one. And then in the morning, I truly didn't want to use, but I felt like I had no choice. The kratom just had such a pull on me, especially those shots, and towards the end, using 9 or 10 a day. I don't know if you want me to talk about rock bottom yet, but kratom just determined what I did, when I did it, how I did it, whether I had to steal for it, whether I had to lie, whether I had to manipulate. Like, it turned me into an ugly person.
Yeah, I can relate a lot. I remember when I was in the deepest part of my addiction to this shit, I would do the same thing every night. I'd be like, I'm done. I'm fully done. And then I'd be in the morning, I'd be in withdrawal. And I was working from home at the time. Part of it was during the pandemic. I remember like I'd have a break in meetings at like 9 or at some point in the morning. And I'd be like sick as all hell riding my bike in the city to the
Yeah.
smoke shop to get a damn shot. But I didn't want to. I just didn't know what to do. We can talk about rock bottom in due course. How long did that progression take from when you went into the smoke shop to buy cigarettes? You try the kratom powder, you try the extract, and then you quit that, then you get on the feel freeze and you progress to where you were up to 9 a day or something.
I say I was off and on kratom for 4 years. So the addiction was 4 years between relapsing and using again. And, I was in that cycle for over 4 years. And then towards the end, it got to the point where I couldn't even string 1 or 2 days of sobriety together.
You sound a lot like me. Yeah, I did that for like 2 years. I would like quit and then I'd be off for a couple days, couple weeks, relapse, do it all again.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it's like the worst cycle of hell because you just keep doing the same damn thing over and over again. It's like the definition of insanity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about what was your rock bottom? How did you pull yourself out of that cycle?
So I really gave it my all for about 6 months trying to get off this stuff, and I couldn't. There was even a point where I got on, we're allowed to mention MAT, right?
Yeah.
So there was a point where I got on a low dose of Suboxone. That still didn't work. So I was like, getting sicker and sicker because this made me sick. And then I was taking Suboxone on top of it just so I didn't withdraw from that. So I was kind of in a mess. But my rock bottom, I remember the day I was drinking and taking kratom, and I was sick as can be. And I remember getting outside my car and throwing up in my driveway, and my son walked out, and I just felt like the lowest piece of crap on earth, just him seeing me in that state, drunk and high. I remember I was supposed to work that day, and I ended up calling off because I had gotten too drunk at work and too sick on kratom. Like towards the end, I was physically, emotionally, spiritually, all the kind of sicknesses you can be. I was sick, but so I was sitting in my car crying out to any God that would listen to me that I just needed help, and I wanted the pain to end. And I didn't care if I lived or died. I wasn't suicidal, but I decided to call an inpatient rehab facility, and I went inpatient for 30 days.
Awesome. It's great that you were able to recognize that and do that. Before we get into that, just for the listeners, this is why I think kratom is sometimes wrongly classified as a lesser substance in some people's eyes. Like the story you just told, you could replace kratom with cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, anything, alcohol, it'll bring you to your lowest lows if you let it.
Absolutely.
How was the 30-day inpatient? What happened? Did you just go directly there, and do they do a detox and then you start to get into the recovery work? What was that like?
Yeah, so they did like a quick Suboxone taper in there, so I really didn't feel any withdrawals, but there were withdrawals before I started taking it. The physical part is pretty minor overall.
Yeah.
And then those 30 days, I mean, I really soul searched and worked on myself and dug deep into my issues. And, I went in scared and hopeless and sad, and I came out full of hope and, optimism for the future. And I cried. I wrote, I worked on my issues. I really came to terms with the fact that I was using because I hated myself. It sucks to be in a body that you hate and, to hate yourself.
Yeah.
Of course, you're going to try to escape that. And I really feel like I was using Kratom to try to get away from the fact that I couldn't stand myself. So overall, I developed so much self-love and compassion and empathy for myself while I was in there and forgave myself for the mistakes that I made. So it was just like life-changing experience. I don't think
Yeah.
could have done it without the inpatient.
That's amazing. Yeah. I think that's like one of the crucial early steps in recovery is forgiving yourself and being able to love yourself. Because if you can't do that, you can't love anybody else. You can't get your own life back on track because you don't have enough value in yourself to invest in yourself to do it. I personally think, but that's kind of what I found.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I came to terms with the fact that I'm not the person I was when I was using. I'm not a liar or a cheater or a manipulator or all these things that I became. I felt like I had to do those things to survive.
Talk a little bit about the Suboxone taper and the detox process. Was it just like a 5-7 day taper where they just start you and just drop your dosage real fast to help you get off? And did they give you other medicine to help with the withdrawals?
No, it was a month-long taper. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, so I started out pretty low and now I'm off of it, but I was on 0.5 milligrams before I got off. So it went from like 4 to 0.5. So it was a slow taper.
Okay. And did you have any discomfort coming off after a month?
Just a little bit, yeah, but
Okay.
not any worse than if I would have just stopped the kratom, cold turkey, I think.
Okay. I just asked because there's a lot of conflicting information about medicated assisted treatment out there. So it's always good to get.
Well, in my opinion, I feel like Suboxone is a very misunderstood drug.
I think so too. So you get out of the experience in the detox and the treatment facility. So have you had any relapses since then, or have you been able to maintain sobriety?
I've been sober for 55 days today.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. The 7th will be 2 months, but no, I have not relapsed. And I committed when I got home. My aftercare plan was, after inpatient, was to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. So every day I either do the Kratom online meeting at 8 o'clock or I go to an in-person AA meeting.
All right, you're doing the damn thing. I love that.
Yeah, I am. I'm committed to it, and I'm also taking care of myself. I'm exercising, eating right, not so much, but getting there, just
one thing at a time, right?
Caring about myself. It's really, I'm not saying I'm never going to use again, but today I can promise I won't use today.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Never's a too big thing for most people to tackle. I can't tackle never. So,
no.
I haven't had a drink in almost 6 years. I haven't had any kratom in a year and a half. All I know is all I have to do is just make it till I go to bed and not use anything, and I'm good.
How long were you on kratom?
I was on it for like 4 years, kind of similarly. The first year was like recreational type, I would call it. I was just using powder. Then I found that extract.
Right.
From there, I got into a daily thing. And then for 2 years, I was like on it, off it. I just kept relapsing.
Did you ever try?
No, I didn't.
Thank God. There's something about them that makes them extra.
Yeah, we had a special segment at one point from a contributor that sometimes does segments for us, and there's like a fermentation process or something that they do when they mix it with the kava, and the extraction process brings out some stronger chemicals supposedly, but I don't know.
So it's less kratom, but it's also fermented kratom, so that's why it's stronger.
Yeah, we've had a lot of guests that have had trouble with that product, and one of our hosts, Chris, was up to 16 of those a day. I did an interview with her, and
that's a lot.
She had a really low bottom where she wrecked her car and had some trouble with her custody of her son. And much love to Chris. She's one of our new hosts. It was a really challenging addiction for sure.
Yeah.
You said you're going to AA and going to the Kratom groups. Are you working the steps too, or do you have a sponsor? How's that working?
I have a sponsor and I am working the steps. I'm on step 3. I kind of work the first 2 steps inpatient, but I also talk to at least someone in recovery every day. So that keeps me grounded and with my mindset in the right place. And I also have people I can call if I'm ever having a craving. I mean, I've got tons of Kratom friends and, AA friends.
Yeah, it sounds like you said, you're going to a Kratom meetings that are online too. So you got like both communities, which is like a double whammy to crush that demon. So I
Absolutely.
love that. Just for the listeners, if you haven't already, check out kratommeetings.com or just go to our website for the podcast and we've got a link there. But there's online meetings now every day. Some days there's even more than one, and they're all run by volunteers that are all really good people. Each meeting's got its own kind of vibe, but they're all about Kratom and full of people that are just going through the same thing you are. Do you do anything else to support your recovery therapy? You said exercise is helpful. Anything else that you're finding, helpful to maintain your sobriety now that you're back on track and working the steps?
Yeah, I actually am in therapy. And then, of course, my job keeps me kind of sane. So I do have a full-time job that keeps me busy. I do have a therapist, and then I also do medication management for my antidepressants.
So you mentioned alcohol too. You're also sober from that. Has that been also 55 days, or do you have more time on that?
No, that's 55 days because, with Kratom, I was like, oh, I'm not drinking. It's all good. But then I started doing both.
Okay.
I would crave one while doing the other and vice versa.
Was that something you struggled with for a long time before you found Kratom? Or what was your story like with just general addiction before Kratom?
Yeah, I had about a 10 to 15 year off and on addiction to alcohol.
Okay.
And then I discovered Kratom and I thought that was the answer.
That was the answer.
As we all do.
Yeah. The answer within itself lies a new problem and demon to deal with, unfortunately, when you pick that one up. Through your relapsing and that part of your story, did you find anything helpful when you were detoxing on your own you would want to share with the guests or listeners? Sorry.
People say just embrace the suck because it sucks. The exercise did help because that helps with the sleep. Sleep is a major issue when you're going through the detoxing. Apparently, vitamin C, I would encourage listeners to look up macrodosing vitamin C because that's supposed to have some benefits as well. But I'm definitely not an expert on that because I didn't really let myself get that bad before I'd relapse again.
Yeah. And what do you think, looking back on it now that you've got some days in front of you, you're coming up on 2 months, what do you think was different this last time? What was it about this last relapse, this last round that made you say, I'm finally done. I've finally had enough. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get out of this.
Well, I believe it took every shot of Kratom, every drink, everything I did. I believe it took all that to get me to where I was because I don't think I would have got to the low rock bottom I was at without all of that. So I think it was just an accumulation of all the misery over the 4 years that made me think like I can't, because I remember last Christmas thinking this Christmas, I don't want to be in the same spot. And I was, it was about to be fall and I was going to be in the same place. And it was just that dread of just not changing. I mean, I just couldn't do it another day. It was one of those
Yeah.
I was just so sick and tired in every sense of the word.
Yeah. Sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yes.
I personally felt the last time for me, it was like I knew that I either continued to do what I was doing, and I firmly believe I would probably be dead at this point because Kratom wasn't cutting it. I was thinking about going back to booze. If I would have went back to booze, I would have went back to drugs. It would have been a fucking nightmare. I just knew that it was either that or get clean. There was no other option.
Another part of my rock bottom was we were to the point where all of our bills were in default. Cars were being threatened to be repoed. If I would have kept using, we would have lost everything. So now I'm still digging myself out of the financial hole that I created because I did spend about $100 a day on my drug. So
I was there too at the end, almost. Yeah, about that amount. And yeah, it took me a while to dig financial. I could have bought a fucking Porsche or something.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's sickening when you think about how much money you spent on something that you initially used to help make you better.
Right.
When you walked into that smoke shop that first day, did you know anything about Kratom? Was that the first time you ever saw it?
I knew nothing about it. I had never even heard the word. And I know it's not a household word, but I think it should be because it's just scary that, well, I want to mention too, I've never been carded for kratom, so I'm just wondering like what age groups are able to buy kratom at this point.
I don't know, to be honest with you. I would assume some states it's probably 21, some states it's probably 18, but I really have no
It
idea.
just,
I've never
yeah, I
looked
mean,
that
I
up.
have a 17-year-old nephew, and it just makes me sick to think that he could go buy kratom here in the next year.
I talked to a young woman about probably 6 or maybe 8 months ago on this podcast. Her name was Brett. I can't remember the episode number. She was in Florida, and they have kratom bars like all over the place there.
Kratom
And
bars.
kava bars. Well, kava bars really, but they make most of their money off of kratom. She and her friends at 14 and 15 were going to a kava bar, and they didn't card anybody, so they were just getting kratom drinks all the time.
I know they have kratom vapes now, which I'm glad I never discovered or tried those.
Yeah, they also have these really strong extracts called 7-OH pills that are like the strongest alkaloid in kratom, and it usually needs to be metabolized by an enzyme in your liver. But that's a whole other demon. I think it's starting to get more well known because there's been some deaths, even though they're still rare. And, there's just so many people now. When Charlie first started the podcast and I got involved at episode 13 and we're at our 100th this weekend, there were nowhere near as many people that were talking about it and struggling. And like there were no kratom only meetings, and just in a year and a half we have meetings every day now. There's so many people talking about it. There's so many news stories. There's local bands happening. It's like one of those things that's going to take a while, I think, to get the attention and the momentum built on it.
I would love to see it off the shelves, but honestly, I'm all for proper labeling. There's nothing on any kratom package that says this is addictive, this is habit forming. I mean, you buy a pack of cigarettes, there's warnings on that. So why aren't there warnings on kratom labels?
Yeah, I live in a state where we have recreational marijuana. You have to go to a specific store. You have to show your ID. They put everything in a computer. They have people that know everything about the product. And they tell you all the risks and everything like that. So
exactly. And you have gas station clerks who don't even have a high school diploma giving out this drug.
Exactly. It's dangerous. I don't think prohibition is the answer necessarily. But there has to be a middle ground that keeps people safe, minimizes the harm. People shouldn't be locked up for stuff, but at the same time, like a kid of any age shouldn't be able to walk into a store and just buy a extract that could get them as high as taking a Percocet.
Exactly.
All right. Well, outside of the recovery group work and AA and going to meetings and therapy, is there anything else that you're doing to support your recovery that you want to share with listeners?
I mean, that's basically it. Everything I mentioned, besides trying to discover new hobbies, things to fill my time. I think that's important. Idle time is the devil's hands, and I don't think idle time is any of our friends. So trying to minimize that as much as I can.
Now that you're through the acute withdrawal stage and you're approaching 55 days, have you noticed any like post-acute withdrawal symptoms like depression, anhedonia, anything like that?
Not at all. Actually, it's like the complete opposite. I was in this cycle
of
using and self-medicating my depression and anxiety. And then because I used, I would get worse symptoms. So I would keep using, and it was in this cycle. So I really believe that a lot of my depression and anxiety were caused from the kratom use, because I haven't felt this good mentally in 5 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like you're taking care of your mental health. You're using some medication as a doctor prescribed, and you're doing all those right things. I bet that'll help a lot. And even if you do experience some pause, you got a lot of really awesome tools in your tool belt.
Yeah, and I've got a very supportive family, brother, sister, mom. They're all awesome.
How's your addiction affected that and your family relationships?
I mean, it's definitely affected the way they trust me. They don't trust me, and I'm still to the point where, even with my husband saying I didn't use today, and there's that doubt still, I mean, I'm not completely to be trusted yet, because I've lied so much that they don't know what to believe, but this time's going to be different.
It takes time, but, it does rebuild. I put a lot of strain on my relationships with my family and with my spouse too, and all that stuff. So it's a constant process, but the more you don't disappoint people and meet your obligations,
it takes time.
The easier it gets. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So if someone was to come to you and they were struggling with kratom or with kratom kava shot extracts, what is the top tip you would give them or tell them if they were struggling and were looking for support?
Oh, jeez. I mean, for me, I know that it takes what it takes, and everyone's rock bottom's different. And I feel like us addicts, we're stubborn and we need pain to change. But, I would share my story and just how bad it can get. I mean, I know other people's stories, they have it worse than me, but, we're all different as far as our rock bottom. If they're not ready, they're not ready. But, I would invite them to at least attend some of those meetings because you have people in those kratom meetings with varying degrees of sobriety. And I really think they can find someone to relate to there. So that's probably where I'd tell them to start.
That's great. It does take what it takes, and you're right, it's different for everybody. All pain and suffering, it's just what's the amount that is the amount that's going to push you personally over the edge.
Right.
Decide that you need to do something differently.
Absolutely.
All right. So what is your life like kratom free? How's the last 55 days been?
It's been amazing, honestly. I mean, I have triggers, and it took me a while to get out of that routine of stopping at the gas station and using, and, there's a whole routine to it. So it took me a little while to get out of that. But now I'm just grateful and I'm enjoying life again. And I'm looking at the stars and the birds and the sunshine and the flowers and just joining life again. I feel like I was checked out for 4 years and now I'm back.
That's awesome. That's really great. So if a listener was listening to this podcast and they were relating to your story and they're thinking about maybe going to an in-person 30-day treatment program as well, any tips for how to think about that or look into that?
Absolutely go, be fearless, be thorough, jump in with both feet and get everything you can out of it.
That's great. I've never actually had the opportunity to do treatment, but I've always been a big supporter. And if it came to that, I would definitely go.
Yeah.
If money was no object and you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go and why?
So I'm a big beach girl. The most beautiful beach I've ever seen in pictures is Fiji. I actually looked up a plane ticket one time. It was $5,000 for a round trip just for the plane ticket. I don't think I'm going there anytime soon, but yeah, Fiji would, if money wasn't an issue, I'd go soak up some sun in Fiji.
Well, once you're back on track after the payments have been made, you can
Right.
take some of that $100 a day you're saving and put it in your Fiji fund, and you'll be there before you know it.
God, I hope.
It's pretty cheap, I've heard, when you get there. So the plane ticket will be your biggest expense.
Right.
All right. Maybe one other fun question, and then we can wrap up. Do you have any pets? And if so, what are their names?
So I have a cat named Ying, Ying. My son named her. Don't ask, but I always say we need a Yang, Yang.
You do need a Yang for your Yang, yes.
Another cat, but my husband won't let me get one because he says we're not a petting zoo. So that's that.
All right. Well, maybe someday you can get a Yang for your Yang.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we wrap up today, is there any questions that I didn't ask you that you would like to share with our listeners, or anything you want to talk about or ask me?
I really don't think so. I mean, I took notes and I think I touched on everything. So I think that's it.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you coming on, Alison. Your story is going to be super helpful for our listeners. I'm proud of you for your 55 days and for getting through that relapse cycle, because I've been there myself and it sucks. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. Bye, everybody.
Hi, everyone. This is Jasmine, and this is your Kratom in the headlines. Today's article comes from the National Library of Medicine and talks about addiction relapse prevention. The article begins by discussing how relapses are a normal part of addiction recovery, but sometimes the overnormalization doesn't allow for resources such as skill development, medication, and monitoring to feel as urgent in recovery. The article then breaks down the stages of relapse, being emotional relapse, followed by mental relapse, and concluded with physical relapse. Skill development for high-risk situations, self-care, and normalizing cravings, plus how to overcome them, are some of the elements that can help individuals who are experiencing these stages. It's important during the primary stages of recovery to implement these practices as well. And the primary stages of recovery include the following: abstinence or coping with cravings and avoiding relapses. This is the first part of addiction recovery. And then after that follows repair. This is the stage that can last 2 to 3 years long and is repairing the mental and physical damage caused by addiction. The last stage is growth, and that is developing key skills that the individual may have missed out on due to the addiction. And of course, this differs for every single person. This is not an exact rule set for how the stages work in addiction, but this is just an overall guideline of what that looks like. And some great tools implemented in these stages that I mentioned to help prevent relapse include therapy, medications, self monitoring, and peer support. And the article also just dives deeper into each of these tools. If you are interested in reading more about them, that is included in the article and the benefits that these resources can give to someone who is in addiction recovery. And I want to say too that I think it's really important to remember to give yourself a lot of grace if you do relapse, because as I mentioned earlier, it is a very normal part of the recovery journey and does not mean that your previous progress is unaccounted for. So thanks for listening and keep it kratom free.
Resource of the week. Hi everyone, this is Jacob, and I am here to give you guys our resource of the week. All right, this episode and resource is all about relapses and relapse prevention. So this week's resource comes from the VA, or the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and it is an article entitled Reducing Relapse Risk. It starts out with a good intro covering that recovery is a lifelong process and talks a little bit about why it's a lifelong process and all that fun stuff. It then talks about what is a relapse. So essentially, they classify relapse as both an event and a process. So the lapse is the initial use of a substance after a period of recovery, and a relapse is continued use after the initial lapse. So essentially, that's how they define a relapse and what we would classify a relapse to. What are some early warning signs that you could maybe look out for if you are being vigilant and want to ensure that you're avoiding a relapse? Probably most listeners are. A couple things that this resource highlights are if you're thinking about using or fantasizing about past use, if you're not reaching out for support when you need it, if you're starting to reassociate with people, places, and things that relate to your past usage, hanging out at the coffee shop, hanging out at the kratom bar or going to the smoke shop. And if you are ramping up behaviors that you used to do, and if you're on medication and you're stopping it without the guidance of a physician who's approving it, you could be at risk for a relapse. Those are some common signs. Oftentimes addicts, and the article and resource gets into this too, have their own kind of markers for relapse. If you've been in the sobriety game for a while and you've relapsed before, you can probably recognize some patterns. I know for myself, not going to meetings and not putting my recovery first is a guaranteed kind of way that I know I'm on the path to relapse. So it's a good way for me to check myself is when I miss a meeting to make sure I'm prioritizing getting to one ASAP and stuff like that. So they get into some research statistics in this resource. So their research indicates that approximately 60% of individuals with substance use disorder eventually enter sustained recovery. But however, many of them, it does take more than one cycle of relapse to finally achieve long-term sobriety. So relapse is very common and is oftentimes a part of recovery. I don't know. And this is not to be discouraging, because if you're crushing it and you have never had a relapse, awesome, you're doing great, and just be vigilant. But many people do relapse, and some people do. It does take a while to get back on the horse, and just know that there are resources out there to help you, including this article and various other things. Okay, risk factors for relapse. So a lot of the common risk factors are you're not ready or prepared for the full process that recovery entails. A lot of people, I see this all the time with kratom too. A lot of people think that as soon as I stop, it'll be over in a week or a month, and then I'm back to normal and good to go. I see this all the time too with Suboxone tapers, by the way. No discouragement to people doing short-term tapers. Just know that the success rate is abysmal for that. So there's a reason why people do, if they get unmedicated assisted treatment, typically do use for a few months to years, because that's just, you're just setting yourself up better for recovery because you have more time away from your drug of choice and you have the medication to help as a buffer. But that's a whole different topic. But some of the other factors that they note are low self-esteem, positive outcome expectancy, thinking the substance is just going to be out of you and be ready to go. There's sometimes pause, like we talked about last week, and several other things. You lose the motivation for the change. You're not building and identifying good coping skills to get you through stressful periods, and you're having a lot of cravings and you're not dealing with those in a healthy way. So how do you avoid and deal with all those risk factors that could potentially lead to a relapse? There's a lot of ways to do that, and a lot of ways to reduce that risk of relapse are essentially making sure that you continue to be involved in recovery, continuing to go to meetings, continuing to engage with the community, listening to this podcast, keeping your disease front and center and working through it. The article gets into a lot more than that, so I won't belabor the point, but take a good read through the article, and I'll just leave you with a few more tips and resources to think about when you're thinking about relapse prevention. Making sure you're getting enough rest, eating a healthy diet, being surrounded in a safe physical and emotional environment, having the right support system, and taking care of yourself, recognizing when you require self-care. And then exercise is super important, and continuing any treatment that you may need. Those are just a number of things you can do to continue to put yourself in a good position to avoid a potential relapse. All right, what is the resource of the week for this week? Stay safe out there, kratom quitters, and avoid a relapse. And if you do end up relapsing, dust yourself off, come back here, listen to a couple episodes, and do the work and get back on the horse. And before you know it, that relapse will be behind you, and you will be back to recovery with the rest of us. So have a wonderful rest of the day, and that's your resource of the week.